Hey BookTube, Chelsea the Reading Outlaw here to do my October wrap-up. I read 8 books this month, which was awesome. Unfortunately, none of them were books that were on my original October TBR, as is unfortunately more and more frequently the case because my depression brain weasels are awful. But I did manage to stay reading this entire month, which is always something that I feel really proud of. So I didn't read anything below a 3-star book this month, which was super awesome. The first book I read was Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. This is like a comedic horror book that manages to really combine comedy while still being legitimately scary. This is a take on kind of like a Scooby-Doo-esque mystery about a group of teen crime fighters and mystery solvers who solve a crime and catch the bad guy and unmask him, and 20 years later realize that they may have gotten the wrong guy, and that whatever is afoot in their small town is actually and legitimately demonic evil. So it is a really kind of wry commentary on those kinds of Scooby-Doo-esque kid-based horror capers, while also doing some really interesting things with like local folklore and potential like cult stuff. And it just combined a lot of things I really liked. I listened to it on audio. I gave it 3 stars because it was enjoyable, but not like an absolute favorite. So if you like horror books that are equal parts horror and comedy, this is really one that I would recommend checking out. The next 3-star book that I read was The BFG by Roald Dahl. We read this book as a family. We listened to it on audio and finished it about halfway through the month of October. I enjoyed this book. This is not one of my favorite Roald Dahl books, though. The BFG really plays with language in a way that is interesting, especially when you're listening to the book. My son loved it. He's 4 going on 5, and the plays with language and the words and the twists on words in this book were super delightful to him. But as an adult, I just found it sometimes it gets a little like overwhelming. So I only gave that one 3 stars. And then the last 3-star book that I read this month was The Grief Keeper by Alexandra Villasante. This book was way more intense than I originally thought it was going to be. The last probably 75 pages of this book are a lot. They are a weight that gets dropped on the reader in a way that I don't necessarily know if I enjoyed, and in a way that kind of threw the pacing off for me a little bit. If you haven't seen any of my videos yet where I've been talking about this book, this is the story of Marisol and her sister Gabby, who have recently arrived in America pursuing an asylum visa, and the story of the violence that surrounds why they're seeking asylum is part of what makes the last 50 pages so incredibly intense. But when their asylum claim is denied, Marisol is given the chance to kind of earn their way into America by participating in a pilot program wherein the U.S. military is designing a study that will allow soldiers returning from war to offset their PTSD physiologically onto another person. So if she volunteers to complete this program and does it for an entire month, her and her sister are basically guaranteed entry into the country. So thus begins this relationship that Marisol has with Ray, who is the girl she is kind of taking grief from, although we learn later on in the book that Ray is not exactly filled in on all the terms of the deal. It's a really interesting story about queer relationships and identity and sacrifice and the lengths that we will go to for family. It's a story of depression and compassion and pain. All the trigger warnings for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, attempts at suicide, internalized homophobia, externalized homophobia, corrective sexual assault, homophobic slurs for both men and women. This book is a lot, and a bulk of that takes place within the last, like I said, maybe 75 pages. So all the caution when reading this book, and maybe if you know going into it that the balance is more weighted towards the second half, that will make the entire book experience more enjoyable to me. But for me, it ended up getting 3 stars because the experience as a whole felt kind of imbalanced. Moving on to the 4-star books, I'm going to talk about these next 2 as just like a bundle because I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about them. I reread both Ashwin and Deacon. These are the first 2 books in the Gideon's Rider book series that I read for Beyond the Sectors podcast. We are switching our focus from Sector 4 to Sector 1, and so I read both of these books for our upcoming episodes. I am getting ready to start Ivan, and then we have some of the short stories, and then we're done. And Anna and I kind of had to figure out what we're going to do with the podcast from that point. But I thoroughly enjoy these books. There is a ton of stuff about these books that I love talking about, especially in terms of like the religion and the development of the sociological aspects of Sector 1. I will leave podcast links down below if you want to hear me talk about it in depth, but you guys have heard me talk about Kit Roca's books before and why I love them. The next and last 4-star book that I read this month was Ashes of Honor by Sean Maguire. This is book 5 in the October Day series, the Fairyland series. I love Toby Day. Toby Day is a changeling fae who is the liege lord to a member of the Dunya-Shi, and her adventures and court intrigues and crime solving, mystery solving capers in every book. This is one of the few like ongoing long running book series that's kind of like this, that I'm like going through, that I'm not necessarily binging, but that I'm just kind of slowly working my way through. I really like these books. The take on fairy and the fae politics and the fairy races in this book is some of my favorite that I've read across like adult fiction dealing with the fae. This book in particular, no spoils, does some things with some people that just like I've been waiting to see happen. And that is maybe the least helpful or descriptive thing that I could ever say about this book. But if you know about Toby and the King of Cats, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So I really enjoyed this book. I love getting further and further into the world of fairy with October. I think that each one of these books is really beautifully paced in terms of providing a closed capsule mystery while also developing and furthering a much larger plot in Toby's life. This is only book 5. I think there are like 15 out so far, so I am really excited to continue to work my way through these. Don't be surprised if you see more of these pop up in some wrap-ups, because I'm really, really enjoying kind of slowly working my way through these at a much more steady pace. I took kind of a big break in between book 4 and book 5, but now I'm back in the mood and really enjoying it. So I can you little soft ASMR there for you. So then moving on to the 5-star books. The first one I finished was To Love and Let Go by Rachel Braithen. I actually listened to this one on audio, but knew I would want to keep it, so I bought myself a hardback copy for my favorite shelf. Rachel is a yoga teacher, Instagram star, yogi influencer. She is under the handle Yoga Girl. If you've ever seen the hashtag Yoga Every Damn Day, that was Rachel's kind of creation. She has a podcast, they have a website, they have charitable foundations, her and her husband. I loved this book. This is the story of Rachel's life and the loss of her best friend and her mother's several attempts at suicide and her own trips through depression and healing. And it is really just a beautiful journey. I love Rachel's voice and her narrative style, so I love listening to this in audio. I've just really found Rachel to be inspiring for a very long time, and her words really resonate with me. And as a yoga teacher, she's somebody that I really look up to. So I really enjoyed finally getting to read this entire book, even as I followed her on social media through all of the events that she talks about. Like, obviously social media never gives anybody the full like scope of picture. So getting to read it in this book was really touching and really meaningful, and I really enjoyed it. The next 5-star book is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, written by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Rosemary Valero O'Connell. This is a graphic novel that is illustrated in shades of gray with pops of bubblegum pink, a really simple line art style, and a really beautiful story about the person that we become when we are pursuing somebody or involved in a situation that is toxic for us and we may not be aware of it, or we may not be able to see it. Freddie, who is our main character, keeps getting broken up with and then re-involved in relationships with Laura Dean. Laura Dean is a leather jacket wearing fuckboy of a girl who keeps stringing Freddie along, and this story is about the journey that Freddie takes, realizing how bad Laura Dean is for her and the friendships and the sacrifices that she's making in her own personhood by constantly pursuing and being there for Laura Dean. This is a story that I really, really related to as somebody who took a long time and made a lot of mistakes in terms of balancing intimate relationships with friendship relationships when I was growing up and in high school. There's a part of Freddie's story that really, really resonated with me. I do want to give a content warning for the fact that an abortion occurs in this book. That is something that I know that some people like to know beforehand. It's handled beautifully and respectfully, and it's not a traumatic or graphic experience, but that is something that I do want to warn for. I loved this book. It has been so long since I've read a young adult book, especially a graphic novel that really captured such a specific part of being a teenager. And Mariko Tamaki was just able to do that so vividly and so personally that it really, really resonated. And then the last book that I read this month, and the last 5-star book that I read, I actually listened to. This is Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow, narrated by Ronan Farrow on the audio. I don't know if I've ever talked about the fact that I have a weird, like, historical crush on Ronan Farrow back from when I was, like, very small, and my mom is a Mia Farrow fan, and I thought the fact that he went to college so early was just so fascinating and appealing and alluring, and I just, like, the Venn diagram of my feelings for him and my feelings for Michael Pitt, like, overlap a lot. It's just, guys, that is all to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This is an elaboration on Ronan Farrow's New Yorker piece about the assault allegations against Harvey Weinstein, but more than that, it is also the story of the reporting of that story. So we hear on audio the tapes of Harvey Weinstein admitting to assaulting a woman. We also hear the story of collecting the interviews, as well as the suppression tactics and the number of times that Ronan Farrow was told to beg off the story, to quit reporting, to cancel the investigation and what he was doing. It's also the story of Ronan Farrow being tailed on and the kinds of power structures that exist that perpetuate abuse of men in power. It is gut-wrenching. It is very hard to listen to in points, but it is also incredibly researched and well done. It is incredibly enjoyable to listen to Ronan Farrow do a bunch of accents. It's also very sweet that this is the book in which he proposed to his partner, John Lovett, who is of crooked media, liberal news, podcast kind of fame. There are so many aspects of this book that I thoroughly enjoyed. If you can pick it up, I recommend picking it up on audio, but if you can pick it up twice, definitely pick up the physical copy as well. I just think it's an important book, and it's important to support people doing the kind of investigative journalism that Ronan Farrow continues to do. So yeah, that is my October wrap up. Those are all of the books that I read this month. Let me know down below what you've been reading, what you have coming up in the month of November. Like, subscribe, comment, leave me an emoji just to let me know you are here. We are quickly approaching my birthday month, and I could not be more excited. You will hear me mention that several more times because it has a big influence on what I'm planning on reading here in the future. Stay tuned for those TBR videos, but in the meantime, friends, come slide into my DMs to talk all things books. And until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have happy reading.